So let's start up part 5 on the intake build, this carbon fiber intake build. And if you guys are familiar with it, you know that I'm making the mold for the carbon fiber build. It's going to be a destructible mold since I'm not going to build it in 2 pieces. I don't want it flanged, and it is not in a shape that can be demolded and taken out in 1 piece. So it's a destructible mold. It's made out of foam, and if you guys aren't familiar with it, just go back and watch the other chapters of it, and it will be self-explanatory once you see them. Anyways, you're probably saying that it looks like it's in the same spot as where I left off in part 4, but there has been some more going on with it. Again, I had pulled off of it for a while because I've been concentrating on the truck, some other shop stuff, and doing some hauls. But now that I'm kind of waiting for that saw to cut the springs on the back of the truck, I decided to get back on this and start working on this again. So it was kind of a relearning experience, kind of figuring out where I left off and the issues that I was having when I left off. So let's jump into it, and I will interject some other clips in here to explain some things. Okay, I was in here in the shop today doing some other things, helping a guy out with a tractor, but without having that saw to do the springs, I'm trying to turn my attention to other areas that need to be done. And one of the things that I hadn't been worked on in a long time is this mold for the air intake on the Cummins engine. So I'm back on that, trying to do it. But one of the things that happened to me last night was, let me explain first before I tell you what happened to me last night. I kind of jumped into this thing without knowing anything about it, as far as building molds, doing composite work on it. I, again, had been in the auto body industry a very long time ago, and had worked with a little bit of fiberglass. So I knew something about fiberglass cloth and resin and stuff like that, but again, I knew nothing about making molds or building composite parts. So, usually on Friday nights, I take my great-granddaughter, Emma, and we go to the bookstore and go out to eat dinner together. And she loves the bookstore. People at the bookstore know her. Make recommendations and stuff like that. So while she was scouting out books, there's a section, a technical reference section, that I kind of look at once in a while. And lo and behold, last night, what do I find but this? It's a book about making molds and working with composite materials. And I picked it up and kind of read about 4 or 5 paragraphs out of it and thinking, what the hell? Didn't I actually look for something like this to begin with? Now, don't get me wrong. I had kind of searched the internet for things about building composite or using carbon fiber to build things. And I seen a couple of videos where people had made composite parts like hoods and stuff like that. But usually those videos are made by, use a specific brand, or are actually produced or funded by a manufacturer of this stuff. What I'm trying to say is this book deals with non-manufacturer specific items. It tells you the varying resins that you can use and what resin would be good with one type of a mold application or one type of a part where it may be subjected to heat or not subjected to heat, and what materials are kind of best to use and how to make molds. And I'm kind of kicking myself in the ass because I didn't think of this. I didn't think to see if there was a book of this type on the market that I could reference to begin with, you know. I guess you'll live and learn. But anyways, I'm back on working on this thing. I'm going to continue along. There could have been other materials that I made this mold out of. Again, this is a destructible mold because the piece is going to be this shape, and there is no way to get this shape back out of a mold, or get the mold back out of the casting, the composite casting. Once it's molded, there's no way to take it out without destroying it. So that's kind of why I made it out of foam to begin with, because I knew it had to be destroyed. One of the things that I read, and again, I've only read probably 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs out of this thing, kind of skimmed through it, but one of the things they were talking about is making molds out of clay, and I kind of thought about clay to begin with, but I thought about the clay hardening and having to dig it out in chunks, and I think they're kind of talking about maybe there could be a clay out there that semi-hardens and will maintain the shape, the mold shape that you want, but is still pliable enough to take it out. Again, I had my head up my ass and should have thought about that to begin with. Seeing if there was some kind of a reference book to go to get some other ideas on this thing, but again, you live and learn. So anyways, I'm back on this thing, continue to work on it and work on other things while I'm waiting for that saw so that I can cut the springs and get on building that air suspension for the rear. Okay, back over here to the intake mold, and as you can see, what I had done is I had put some more body filler on it, put some more spot putty on it, and then sanded it off, and found all of these areas, and it's a little bit wet still, but let me kind of show it to you here. What happened is it became extremely spongy. So what I think was, and this was with the spot putty, same thing up here. What I think is the chemicals in the body filler, or the spot putty in this case, are interacting with the foam in certain places, and it's probably the places where, again, that contact cement was kind of deteriorated the foam, and where I had shaped it and it became kind of really thin in that spot, so you had underlaying thin areas where the foam had deteriorated because of contact cement. So I keep working this and keep working it, and other spots keep coming up and keep coming up. So what I tried to do is put a primer over it. Now this is something that you shouldn't do in like body work, but what I try, because this is a mold and it's an expendable mold, I'm going to try it with this. I put body primer over it, put primer over it, hoping that the primer would isolate those areas away from the spot putty or body filler so that I could get put body filler and primer or spot putty over it, and the primer would keep it isolated away from the what is going on with this? Sorry, my gimbal just went nuts. Okay, so let me interject this clip here while I fix a gimbal. And as you know, it's interjected in editing. It isn't while I fix a gimbal. I'll bring you back after that gimbal gets fixed. One of the things that I was talking about was putting the primer over it and hoping that would isolate the spot putty away from the foam. Well, it didn't work. When you spray the primer onto the foam, in those areas, it would like congeal in certain spots, but keep the foam exposed in other spots. So even though I did that, I put the putty over it, it still did the same thing. So it's got to be a chemical reaction between the putty and the foam. This spot putty, basically all it is very thick primer paint. I'm not having that issue with the body filler on this thing. And as you can see by the red, which the spot putty is, I don't have the issue in some places on this thing. It only seems to be where two layers of foam have been joined together. For some reason, that chemical reaction between the spot putty and where the foam has been joined together seems to make it worse in that area. You come out to an area where there is no joint and you can put spot putty on it and it works fine. It doesn't dissolve the foam or create a void in the foam. But anyways, so that's the deal with it, and I'm going to go on from there, and then I'll bring you back and kind of show you what I'm doing and what I plan on doing to make it, and kind of why I'm doing this, building this composite thing. But let me continue on where I left off after the gimbal died. Sorry, the batteries must have been getting low on it, and it goes kind of crazy when that happens. Anyways, so I put the primer over it, hoping to isolate those areas so that I can put more body filler, more spot putty into them, and it won't interact with it the way it has been doing it, because the primer will create a seal on it. Now, I'm not sure it's going to work, but I will let you know. So that's what I'm doing, just putting primer on it, and then we'll isolate it. Again, it shouldn't be done like in body work, because you never want to put spot putty, well, not spot putty, you never want to put body filler over paint. It will eventually come off. But I don't really care in this application because, again, it's an expendable mold. Once the composite carbon fiber gets molded over this thing, the mold is going to be destroyed taking it out, so it really doesn't matter in this case. Okay, let me just explain one thing to you. One of the reasons that I'm kind of showing this to you, all the issues that I'm having with this, is because I have not found this information anyplace. I told you I found that book, and I haven't read the entire book word for word yet. But let me tell you that in the parts that I have skimmed through and saw, I have not found out how they go about gluing the foam together to make a mold, how they finish the mold. As you all know, foam has a rough texture. And what they are trying to achieve is a very smooth texture for the inside of a mold so that it will delaminate itself from the mold, and also you will get a smooth, clean surface finish. So they haven't covered those parts, and that's kind of why I'm telling you, why I'm explaining to you the issues that I had and how I'm trying to resolve those issues. Just so that you know that. So all of this talking that I'm doing about these problems is because I have not found these problems and their resolution addressed in online or in this book yet. Not saying that it isn't there, I'm just saying that I haven't found it yet. So just so that you have a heads up in case you ever do this, that what the issues could be and how I went about fixing those issues. Okay, it's the next day from when I had showed you the me coating it with the primer, and I put the body filler on it and used that rasp to take off most of it. I'm going to sand it now, but it seems to have worked a lot better than when I didn't prime it first. In other words, I'm not getting them big voids in it like I did before. So what I'm going to do, sand it again, because I had only used the rasp on it to take off the high spots. I'm going to sand it and then reprime it, and then continue to fill in until I get it down to where I want it. But I'll bring you back as I progress. Okay, so what I did is sanded it down, and I'm in the process of repriming it. I've just got the top side done. I will let it dry, flip it over, coat the bottom side, find out what I've got for imperfections. It's a lot easier to see imperfections into a piece after you've painted or primed it than it is to see it beforehand. And flipped it over on the bottom side for prime. Okay, let me get into why I am making this intake manifold. I've covered it in previous things, but again, it's been a long time since I posted a video on this, and for the new viewers that don't want to go back and try and find it or figure out or search through all the videos to figure out why I'm doing it, let me explain it to you. This is the original intake manifold off of the 8.3 Cummins, and as you can see, it's kind of very restricted. This, I can't show you the head because the head is actually upside down over on the mill bed, waiting to get some studs removed out of it and some other work done on it. But this long narrow port is basically the opening of the head for the air intake. So let's call it the plenum. So this opening covers the plenum of the head, and it sits this way. So number 6 cylinder is down there, number 1 cylinder is up there. So as you can see, it's very restricted. Well, I wanted to get a manifold for it, but they do not sell, or let me rephrase that, I can't find aftermarket intake manifolds for the 8.3 Cummins. So that's why I'm buying it. This thing, I need to get better airflow into this head. Again, as you can see, it's very restricted. So that's why I'm doing this. So what this thing does, and you'll have to excuse it because it's upside down, but basically what this is going to do is bring a 4-inch There'll be a silica boot on this thing that comes over the end and brings the air in and kind of distributes it evenly through the head and not be restricted as the original intake manifold was. So there's that. And again, I can't find an aftermarket manufacturer for this, along with a bunch of other parts that I wanted for the engine. But let's get into that in the truck build, not on this thing. So that's why I'm building this. So it's very possible that I could get this damn thing built in 2 weeks or a month or a year later. Somebody will tell me, oh yeah, somebody such and such a manufacturer makes aftermarket air intakes for it, but at this point in time I can't find it, so that's why I'm building it. Okay, so on the mold, I think I have this under control. You don't want to use that spot putty on the foam in a big area because you're going to have a chemical reaction to it. Small little spots are okay, but big areas are not. Body filler, that's the way to go on big areas. But you still have to be careful with body filler. You don't get a chemical reaction, but body filler produces quite a bit of heat. So you've got to just kind of make sure you control that heat and aren't melting or disforming the foam because of the heat. So we've got that. Now what I'm going to do is I have to provide a flange on this so that this thing can bolt onto it. So what I've taken, I've got a piece of it's acrylic or plexiglass, anything like that. What I'm going to do is build a mold out of this. So I'll take the shape of the outside to produce a flange, and these notches are in there so that you can get to the injector ports. So those notches have to stay in there. So what I'll do is produce a duplicate of the outside of this existing air intake to make that will produce the outside of the flange, and then I'll impregnate that over or laminate it over a plain piece so that I can set that onto it and have the flanged area around it so that I can create a flange out of carbon fiber. And that's kind of where I'm going to go with that. So that'll probably do it for this chapter of the video, kind of reintroducing everybody back into what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and why I'm doing it, the issues that I've had with it and how I resolve those issues. But anyways, that's it for this chapter. I'll bring you back.